Okay, we have some attendees joining us.
Hi, Hillary.
Oh.
Hi, Kiki. Hi, everyone.
Good to see you, David.
Nice to see you.
I was commenting on you are not in your fancy library any longer.
Yeah. For some reason, my library doesn't want to link into this web program, but my computer at work will. Go figure. And the county's computer system won't accept my visual for the background. So you're stuck with my real office.
All right, we're looking good on our attendance, so let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Kiki Miller. I'm a council member in Coeur d'Alene, and I've been kind of the neutral moderator here for this Regional Housing and Growth Issues Partnership. The partnership roster is at kmpo.net under featured programs, drop down to working groups, and you can see who all of the working group members are, and they represent the regional jurisdictions, city planners, and electeds, and also a roster of who the advisory partners are, as well as the format of how our meetings work. So if you're new to the group or you're stepping in for someone, please get yourself up to speed on what we're all about and who we are on that site. A couple of announcements first. One is that, speaking of that site, we did have some updates put into that. So they've done a little bit more work to clean that up. There was an email that went out to all of the advisory group members, and that may be something that becomes a little more frequent as there's so much activity going on in between the month that the advisory group meets on a Zoom meeting, the working group gets together, and then individually, there's just been a lot of activity. So we sent out an update email to all of the advisory group partners. And I would ask that all of you advisory group partners take it upon yourself to share the information, the progress that this group is doing within your own networks, based on that email and based on what you learned today and where we're at. The other announcement I had is that, and Hillary helped me out with some details on this, but the Historic Preservation Commission for Coeur d'Alene, if you'll just briefly update us, there's been a shift with the county group a little bit, and there's also a public meeting on August 24th on the Historic Preservation Plan. Can you add a little bit to that?
Right, so the City of Coeur d'Alene, we've recently added a new Historic Preservation Commission. And so we've been working with a consultant to draft a historic preservation plan for the city. So we're ready for a draft to be reviewed. That'll be available this week on our website. And then the public meeting will be in August, as Kiki mentioned. And I think the shift you're talking about is maybe the Garden District survey that was done by the county's commission and now is going to be under the purview of the city's commission.
So that was the shift. Thank you. So so the next thing, that's all I had for announcements. And then the next thing I wanted to touch base on, at our last meeting, we did a SurveyMonkey interview, exit interview with all of our advisory group members. Many of them took it as they left, but there was some connectivity issues. So we sent the survey out via email. So today, I believe all of the advisory group members got 2 different documents, which were the results of that exit survey. And the gist of that was because we needed to know how we're doing. Are we on the right track? Get input from our advisory group members. It's very important that we keep the community engaged in this, and also make sure that our priorities were still intact. Just as a reminder, we did a regional poll early on. We had 2,700 respondents, and they prioritized what items they wanted this group to take a run at first. The number 1 item we'll talk about here in a minute, and that was a collaborative effort to preserve open space on the prairie. As we've gone through these priorities, we wanted to touch base with them. So this exit survey asked them if local worker housing was indeed the next item they wanted us to focus on, and it was overwhelmingly agreed that that's where our direction should take us. So we have been doing that. And that's the Survey Monkey results are all the advisory group members have that. One of the things I think that came out of that was important is that there were a lot of people who wanted to be more involved and be engaged in a more proactive way. And I believe that with the size of group that we have and the monumental projects we're attempting to tackle here, Zoom has been really one of the best tools we could ever ask for to get this much cooperation, coordination, and information shared. So we are hoping for some subcommittee opportunities where we can, once we drill down into some of these smaller items, be able to do possibly some public groups get together, at least on a specific topic, so there can be some more engagement. And if anyone else has any other ideas of how we could more perfect engagement and interaction with the advisory group, please email me directly. I'll try to incorporate everything I can, but we have some big projects ahead of us and a lot of people involved. And so we're moving forward as this animal morphs into whatever it's going to be in the future in the most efficient way that we possibly can. So that was kind of some of the information in the exit survey. You'll be able to see what other folks said, and they may be along the lines of some things you're thinking too. So I'll move on to our next item, which was prioritization plan updates. So this is what I was talking about. We've been kind of tackling things in priority. As we had our open space on the prairie was the number one thing that our poll came back and told us to do. So for months, we've been putting together that. And I will tell you that where we are at is that there is a large body of information that we've collected. And I was going to just briefly here have Hillary share screen, and we've been putting together a document. And that document is still pending three kind of large elements. One is in 2002 to 2005, there was a huge effort on the preservation of the Rathdrum Prairie, an actual multi-phased plan. And we've talked about that, but it isn't completely included in here because there's just a lot of pieces to it. It had a whole advisory group, much like this, a mission. It had mapped open spaces. It had documents on benefits of open space, local financing options. And we had Glenn Miles do a follow-up presentation in one of our meetings that kind of told us where that effort ended up, why it didn't move forward, and put a lot of information into the historical aspect of that particular thing. So that Prairie project still has a placeholder. We're still going to put that in there. The other things that some of this group has seen presentations are things that have percolated throughout the region regionally. And what we're trying to do is our mission is to create a resource bank of all of these things with ideas should individuals or organizations want to move forward with that. So we still have one thing that wasn't added was the relocation. I think under open space proposals, you'll see that there's under the table of contents, the agricultural and working lands group, there's a couple of organizations and individuals who are putting together things that if the communities, jurisdictions, or whomever wants to come together and help these ag folks to continue working their land and preserve it as open space, they're putting together ways that we could do that as a region. The large recreation district has been proposed by Kootenai County, Parks and Rec, as well as an individual. So we're linking all of those proposals together in this document as well. So this is the general table of contents that has all of it, but as you can imagine, I'm not even sure if it's going to be able to be housed on one of the large websites, because it is going to be a fairly substantial. But hopefully what we will be able to do is at the end, you will have maps, we will have all of the analysis that we've shared in kind of a summary format here that we've been working on for months, and then some links to grant sources and individuals who can help should there be a group or an entity that wants to move forward with one of these options. So we're not going to put, as we had joked about one time, people's personal cell phones in there, but we are going to put together what a lot of these options are. And as you're seeing it scroll through, this is transfer of development rights, conservation easements, all of the things that we've been talking about in one collected document. So if you advisory group members, this is a kind of a flyby of what is happening right now. This should be the last large elements connected to this document. And if not completely in one document, at least links to different segments of them. And if you see this document, it'll be at kmpo.net. It'll be our wrap up on the priority plan to collaborate on preserving open space in the prairie. And if you see something that needs to be added there, as you peruse that, please contact me and I will hunt it down and know that this is still a living document. We can add things to it at a later date. And we're thinking our time frame is a week to maybe less than 2 weeks that the working group has got a chance to see this. And then we're collecting these last pieces of documentation to put together in that. So thank you all. That was a huge body of work, a lot of information. I think a lot of folks were kind of frustrated because we went through this and said, wow, we've already done this 2 or 3 times. And at the same time, there's new information and there's new people and there's new desire to pick up the pieces and do some different things. So having said that, again, advisory group, that will be out. We'll send an email when it's posted to the site. So please take a look if there's anything missing and we will add it to that document and hopefully we've created a good resource for the region. So with that, if Maggie is ready, as you know, the Panhandle Affordable Housing Alliance and the Economic Development Council out of Coeur d'Alene have funded a housing assessment being conducted by the University of Idaho. And they have been great to work with. The advisory group members, thank you all very much. They have had a breakneck pace at getting this information together, collected. And I don't know that it would have been possible without this group being in place and being so cooperative with trying to address this issue. So if Maggie, you want to give us a little update on where we're at, I'd appreciate that.
Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Kiki. I would just emphasize what Kiki said. Without this partnership's cooperation, we would not nearly be where we are today, I think, with the progress that we're making with this study. So thank you so much. So the study really is dedicated to trying to give us as a region somewhat of a rudder for direction, because we have multiple jurisdictions. We have a lot of different parties who are interested. We all know that there's a housing crisis here in Kootenai County, and what do we do about it? So the genesis of this study really started because, Jobs Plus on the one hand, and others needed to just know, well, what do we have for current inventory, and where are we going with the demands and the shortages we have and our growth in the future. So the scope of this study really is to gather the data. It's not solutions oriented. It's to give us that rudder of what the data tells us about our region, and then the solutions can develop from there. So the 2 primary sources are there's a primary source of data collection, and then there's a secondary source, and the primary source is what this partnership has been so involved in, and that's direct interviews. In addition to the interviews that the U of I has conducted with this group, they are also sending out employer surveys to 10 major employers in our region to ask them about their specific issues with inability to hire because of lack of housing. In addition to that, they're going out directly to employees. So a survey is going out directly to residents of this county to ask them, and it's particularly relevant, I think, to the renters on where they stand right now. What have they seen in the last year in their experience? Have they been displaced because of rent increases and or the selling of their rental home? Where are they in their own home journey? So it's very difficult because data is usually very dated. Most of the secondary data, which U of I is drawing from, is 2019 and doesn't really reflect the effects of the COVID tsunami that's happened in our region. So we're pretty hopeful that these surveys are going to give them some really good real-time feedback about what people in Kootenai County are experiencing. So that's the data collection that gives you an overview of the reason for the study. In terms of the status, they are in the throes right now of collecting the primary data. They have been doing secondary data collection since the beginning. I think we will have a preliminary draft of their findings by the end of September. The goal is a final report by the end of October, which is really quite breakneck speed for this level of a study. And that information will be available to everybody. We want every interested group who's been involved in this process to have access to it because it helps us make better decisions as a region. We have included Shoshone County in this, and they actually have been able to collect some primary data through interviews with the Shoshone Housing Group and the Economic Development Council there, as well as the secondary. But as you know, that's become quite a commuter community for Kootenai County. So I don't know, I don't think it'll be as thorough in terms of the primary data collection, but I think it's going to be a lot better than what my expectations were in the beginning. So it is really a regional study that hopefully will provide every jurisdiction and all the interested parties. It's across all wage levels. So we're not focused on high income or low income. We're focused on the spectrum between that. So it's essentially 3 income groups: the relatively low, the middle income, and then the high income, because it's impacting all employees at all wage levels. So that's an overview. I don't know, Kiki, if you have anything you want to add to it, but we're really hopeful that as a region, this is going to give us a really good understanding of what's actually happening right now and where it's going to go for our community over the next 1 to 3 years. Yep.
Thanks, Maggie. It's important work, and I appreciate that. Housekeeping here. Hillary, is Sean able to be monitoring the chat box for us today?
Yes, I don't see anything in the chat yet, but he is
Okay.
on.
All right, I just wanted to make sure if there was a question that somebody had as we go along, that we have a chance to answer that. That's been effective for us, and if we don't get it while we're talking, we'll get back to you, or we will get it answered before the end of the meeting. But thank you, Maggie, I appreciate that. I'm going to move a couple things up on the agenda because we'll take the local worker housing discussion last. So just a quick update on the school subcommittees. There is it's about a 7-person group now that is going to convene their meeting in mid-August. Jeff Bowler, who is the Director of Operations for Coeur d'Alene School District, has agreed to lead that organization. So we have school district representatives and others who've been involved in this sort of thing. They will be talking about what options they may have regarding support of schools on a local level, as we, in our poll priority, we're asked to do. So I will be connecting with them, setting up Zoom meetings, and getting back to this group to give you a report on what's happening. But again, probably we'll have a brief on who they are and what they're doing by the next advisory group meeting at the end of August. The other thing is on the FAQ updates. As I had mentioned, KNPO still continues to do a great job at being a partner without having to support us all, housing all of the information on this important work. And I appreciate that. They've cleaned up some things on the website. We had a couple of questions about that, as well as affordable housing. What is affordable housing, that have been added to the FAQs. And there is now a list of over 60 articles with links that are on the housing and growth topic that have been run in the local newspaper. And I've got them collected into a PDF. Thanks to the help of Madison and the Coeur d'Alene Press, I will be able to now determine if we're going to be able to put those on the site with live links or how, but we've got them collected, and that should be out within a week or so. So working on that. So now we're going to wade into the local worker housing topic, and I'm saying wade in because this is a huge conversation that we have all been having, and we're going to start paring it down to manageable chunks if we can, and address things as they are able to be. This meeting today is really going to be an introductory meeting into how we think we can move forward with what's really the working group determined is long-term. This is not something we're going to come up with in 90 days and start throwing out random potential ideas. What the working group needs to do is vet out things that are doable in our region and in our state through many different avenues, including primarily legal, their own jurisdictions, and come together to make sure we're putting forward some reasonable recommendations that are actually doable. So how we do this in building a framework for how this policy works is what we're starting to wade into today. And this is gonna a lot be based on the work and research we're doing that's running parallel to the housing assessment Maggie was talking about. So we hope that as we move on, this housing assessment is going to inform some of these ideas we've been talking about. And by that time, we will have hopefully been able to find out and vet out which ones our legal staffs and our electeds and everyone who would have to implement these says these are possible doable items. So one of the things I'm just going to wade into talking about, and if any of you of the working group partners have something you want to add, please raise your hand, stop me so we can jump in. Or if I'm off the rails and I've kind of brought something forward in terminology that isn't exactly accurate, please correct me. I don't want to have that out there as any kind of a misunderstanding. Some of the current available options for preserving and creating local worker housing, and we are using local worker housing because as Maggie said, you know, the assessment is dealing with income ranges of all types. And I'm not sure that for this region, anyone here is interested in creating housing for people who don't live here. So what we're really focused on is preserving and creating housing for people who need to work where they live. One of the topics that had come up was short-term rentals in our work group meeting, but as I understand it now, and any of you raise your hand if I'm not correct with this, Coeur d'Alene is the only municipality that has a short-term rental ordinance at this point. So Coeur d'Alene has been looking at reviewing that ordinance. It's, I think, only 3 years old. It hasn't been in effect. It has some changes that were already planned to be incorporated into Coeur d'Alene's comp plan, but we know that vacation rentals are having an effect on our housing inventory and our housing prices and our investment groups and what's happening in this region. So that's an item this group is probably not going to, unless the advisory group comes back very strongly during our next survey and indicates they want us to do that, talk about as one of its first items, because it only affects one of the jurisdictions. So that is going to stay on the table for conversation, and we're going to keep looking at the rental, short-term rental, vacation rental topic throughout the region and how it affects our local worker housing. So what I'm talking about here are some things that are what is available, what could happen, and making sure that you all are aware that the direction this group is taking these items and kind of looking for the low-hanging fruit. What are some things that we can do right away, immediately, that are already legal in the state of Idaho, that are something that we could all as a region come to a consensus that this would be a helpful change to affect our housing market, and then approach that from there. There are things like our ADU amendments could be made that would change maybe how that looks. That's a big topic, but it's one that our planners can look at. There may be eligibilities within PUDs that our planners could look at to say at annexation point, can we write codes that are would help us sustain some inventory for local worker housing. And that sounds, there's a lot of elements to that, but it's also new. It's not new, it's things that can be done. It's just a matter of what our goal with doing some things like that might be. One of the other things is, as we've all read about, the Sandpoint model, which would be developers who take on a voluntary covenant restriction. And that's something that has been done in many other towns, but it's something that we could look at in creating programs here that may incentivize that kind of thing, or at least make it well known on how it can operate and provide assistance to developers who may want to do something like that. there's some, and I'm putting these out there. As I said, our goal is to do things like create opportunities to advance some things that are already available and we know can be done, and how do we put that together, bring that back to the advisory group for some priorities and say, which one do you want us to move forward with? And then there's also new things that, you know, we may be able to engage our urban renewal development organizations in a different way to affect local worker housing. We have community land trusts is a conversation that came up. Even nonprofit co-op management of housing properties, some limited equity, what was that called? Co-ops, and that's almost kind of the Habitat for Humanity model somewhat right now, where it could be expanded to different properties throughout regions, depending on how codes were written and how cities took a look at that. So I'm rattling through a lot of those items, and our plan is to take some of these items, digest them, get a good summary out, go to the advisory group, and have the working group really start with just a smaller bite than there's probably 25 different housing topics that we have been bantering about on what could be done in the region to protect local worker housing. So we're trying to put together a short list of things we can start analyzing and then really bring back to this group for some more input and direction. So Hillary, what I wanted to touch on, you had, and this is just an example because it is one of the things that this group may consider doing and discussing, but McCall has put together they actually are a much different city. So it's a good one for us to use as an example because they are not, none of our cities up here, except for Sandpoint, have the resort city designation in the state of Idaho, which gives them a local taxing authority that we don't have. We can't do a gas tax, we can't do a grocery tax, we can't voluntarily tax, but if you're under a certain population, this is the general summary of it, that you have the ability to have that status and you do have the ability to tax for certain things. So McCall's economic development organization and their planning is one committee of their city, and they created a local housing policy. And their situation was such that if they didn't do that, they had literally nearly run out of places for local workers to live. So on a smaller microscopic scale for our region, it's kind of a good one to say, here's a what if. What they are up to now is they've created a certain set of goals. And I will tell you that the McCall housing policy is part of this meeting. So the link to their policy document we'll put on the KMPO site if you want to peruse that. It's kind of just a little outline that is something that this group may potentially decide to follow. So they created, they had a comprehensive plan, but they also on top of that had a local housing incentive program. And what they are doing now, and Hillary, jump in if I'm misspeaking, please, or if you want to share with it, but they are putting an RFP out so that they can take many of these programs, as you're seeing her scroll through there, land banking and where, how that would work. And they're having an outside organization come in. And Hillary, will you jump in and explain what you know about that group?
Yeah, so City of McCall is working on this, and they have their own housing advisory committee that kind of sits within the city. But as you can see on this page of their RFQ, which is request for qualifications, their impact area is broader than just the city. So it's really in essence Valley County. And so they're really looking for a consultant or a qualified individual to help them look at everything they've done so far and then come up with a strategy for the next 10 years of how they can really tackle this affordable housing issue for their local workforce. And so, as Kiki said, we'll share this document on the KMPO page so everyone can see this. And this is something we've, could consider after the housing assessment is done. That's what the first step was that McCall did with their comprehensive plan, was really do a housing assessment and then implemented some of those changes by code amendments at that time.
Cool. Thanks, Hori. So as I said, as we're wading into this, this is just one example that we thought this will give you a good idea to say this is a what if. One of the discussions that needs to come up and will probably be in the next working group meeting is we have to go through a lot of processes here, in that this is a large group of advisory folks that it's difficult to keep them each engaged on, what piece of this actually affects their individual business or organization. And it's also a group of, city individuals and elected individuals who all approach this from a different angle. One of the conversations we had and will have again is, should there be a separate entity? Do we discuss with our networks, our electeds, the rest of our administration, on creating some separate group that creates a housing policy for the region? Or do we continue to do what we're doing here and create a housing policy document? Or do we sit down through this group and just put forward individual items that we've vetted out, that an a la carte approach could be taken to see what works for every city? So as we're moving through this, especially for working group members, that's kind of what we're tasked with here in the next long term. I don't think this is going to be a short term thing. The other thing is that we have organizations in this region already that do things with housing. And so a big piece of what we haven't even delved into yet is to try to identify individual organizations. And I'm going to use PAHA for an example, because Maggie and I talked about this a little bit. Perhaps United Way, Habitat for Humanity, maybe even our EDC groups, some of our urban renewal organizations may be able to take on some of this conversation with how do we change what's possible in zoning in our region to address this issue, and at what level. So those are some very large, items that we're taking on here in the next couple of working group meetings, and they are probably going to be new ones added as we come up out of that. So working group members, can you help me with any feedback here on some of these items that we've talked about so far, and any that you think we need to move forward so the advisory group knows what we're working on, and somewhat of the ones I've mentioned? Do we need any more to be added?
Nothing more comes to my mind. I like the a la carte approach.
And I think we just had a question. If you, Hillary, can you read that one? Or
Sure, I can read that one. Yeah, I was going to say that Shelley had her hand up, but it looks like she chatted with us. So here is the question. Has anyone suggested land use planning to include infill? For example, easing up property restrictions to allow for flag lots, secondary units on existing properties so that smaller second unit homes could be built, limits demand on land and expansion, makes all current spaces more dense within district boundaries. This kind of zone change works in many other cities, regions. Sorry, trying to stay on the same page here without missing part of her question. Okay, so regions to preserve open space, sorry. So to answer that for Coeur d'Alene, we do have infill districts already, and then we have started an effort for what we're calling core housing, which is based on missing middle housing principles. We have postponed that slightly just because we're trying to finish up work on our comprehensive plan at this time, but we have talked about that. We also already allow accessory dwelling units, and I know many of the other communities, I know Post Falls has some of their own smart code. I don't know if John wants to speak to that or not. And then allowing ADUs, and then I know Hayden also has some of that in the works. And same with Rathdrum, I believe, is also working on allowing ADUs. Other planners want to weigh in?
Hillary, we allow ADUs up to half the size
Oh, that's
of
right.
the
Thank you.
primary use.
Thank you, David.
So yeah, Post Falls, we're looking at clarifying and expanding our ADUs. So you can have attached and detached ADUs. So I'm working with the building department on that. We have a residential mixed zoning district. We're actually proposing to reduce our R2 zone minimum lot size so we can get some cottage home development or allow for it. So we are aiding and assisting the infill opportunities, just getting the development community on board with also providing that housing stock too.
And on that, I think that sometimes there's this question on, the difference between how does infill help a city versus the growth issue of a city. So I think that's one thing that that may be larger than what this group wants to tackle today. But I think that does become very confusing for people in that infill is just viewed as high density and sometimes it's not. So anybody want to weigh in on the density versus infill conversation? Smart. Okay, so we will be talking about a lot of those things. I think that answered Shelley's question. It seems like there's a couple more questions that are popped
We
up.
have a new one that just came in from Barb Neal. So our tiny house subdivisions an option. So for Coeur d'Alene, that's something that we're considering with our core housing code. Otherwise, it would have to be in our, I think, Sean, mobile home 8, or if they were on wheels, then they would have to be in an auto camp, which is an RV camp. I don't know if the other cities and county want to weigh in on tiny house subdivisions.
We adopted the same state code that's in the ice, or that everyone else has, and so they're allowed in the county. It would be tricky to do a subdivision, though. I think we'd probably have to handle it as a PUD.
I think in Coeur d'Alene, we used to have pocket housing and a cluster housing code that were revoked. And they've been around for a number of years, and we haven't replaced it with anything in the tiny house category yet. And that was going to be coming back in through core housing. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. So Ed asked a related question about describing a tiny or a cottage home, square footage, bed, bath, etc. So the interesting thing, I think, with the new changes to the building code at the state level that I think all the jurisdictions have incorporated, I don't believe there is a minimum anymore for the unit. There used to be, but now it has to meet all of the components of what is a dwelling unit. So it has to have kind of a sleeping space, sanitation space, cooking, and then kind of a living. So it can, and they do now allow, you can have a lofted space with a ladder with some of these new changes at the state level. Anyone want to clarify what I said?
Sounds correct. One of the biggest issues I think the city of Coeur d'Alene has seen with these over the years is that they're not considered real property. And so it gets pretty difficult to place them into our R zones because they could potentially disappear in the middle of the night. There's some questions about still having to pay the full fare for water and sewer fees and impact fees and things of that nature. So there's still some work to be done on that.
And Sean, in particular, if you're talking about on wheels versus on foundation.
Correct, right. So it might be on like a set of ribbons, which isn't necessarily considered real property. It's not permanently attached to it like a foundation. So that's why we've allowed them in our MH8 zones, although we have seen very few of them. We do get requests quite often in a residential zone. Whether or not they would fit into a full-blown residential neighborhood is yet to be seen.
I think another point with that too is a lot of people are building what is considered a tiny house as an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat, so kind of in their backyard. And so that is allowed and then just has to meet the building and the zoning codes. Ed asked another question about how do they fit into zoning, lot size, title, So as Sean mentioned, some of those things are an issue with real property, and then lot size can be an issue, and setbacks and everything else to make it viable. And so I think what David said makes sense to see it in a PUD, so a planned unit development, so it could be more customized, or if through our core housing code, or if the other cities come up with something that specifically allows kind of a tiny house subdivision to take place. And then two, if it's individual lots, or if it's kind of more of a condominium style condo plat. So there's another question in here from Nash. How do you prevent a wealthy third party from acquiring the pocket housing development and trying to sublet at a higher rate? So this is something that I think Kiki's had mentioned in some of the things to kind of consider, but James Casper's on here from Habitat for Humanity. And so one of the things that they are doing in our area, which is the first that I'm aware of, at least in Kootenai County, is we're doing like a housing land trust where they're able to keep the ownership. So Habitat keeps the ownership of the land, and then the individuals can buy the house. And so it keeps it affordable over the long term versus having all the equity leave when the first people that are more in that affordable or workforce housing range, when they sell it, then the next people can't come in at the affordable range.
And further, the other item that I had mentioned earlier, and as these will kind of dovetail back together, these are things that haven't been vetted out, whether they are actually doable. So I'm putting this disclaimer on here again and again. We are studying these items, but the limited equity co-ops are another item. Is that if perchance the answer to the question, theoretically, the land could be in a land trust, could be owned by a nonprofit. The homes could be sold at whatever the fair market value of them was, but they're covenanted properties, so that they have to be a member of the HOA, they have to be owner occupied. And when that person sells, they have a limited equity that they are able to recoup out of that, so that it still leaves it in a scalable housing market category. So that's just things that have been talked about and done in other places, and don't know how that might work, but that's the other thing. This covenant restrictions on properties that is coming up all over could be something that, you know, requires it be an owner occupied local worker product. So those are things that are part of what our next many months of work ahead of us are going to be. Were there any other questions?
I don't see anything else in the Q&A or in the chat. Anyone want to raise their hand in the?
Looks like James weighed in and said the current Habitat projects are the first to combine all of those features in one project in the state of Idaho. Congratulations, James, and thank you, because we're keeping our eye on that, and that's just great work.
Oh, we have a new question from Len. Urban renewal was mentioned as a possible resource. Over the past few years, the legislature has made changes to this program, which focus on economic development and job creation, very limiting on housing.
Is that a question?
I think just a comment, but yes, thank you, Len. We're aware of that. And again, as Kiki had mentioned, these are things that we're just exploring. They're kind of just the laundry list of things that we need to look into, and we'll be having to vet these with our legal counsel just to see what is viable, especially in Idaho, given a lot of the changes at the state level with legislation.
And how these those cooperatives work. I think that everyone, even at the state level, understands that this housing situation, especially in these highly sought after markets, is affecting us all over the country, and we're going to have to be creative and open-minded. So I'm hoping that the ones I've talked to anyway, and this group have been very willing to dig in and work and say, we know we have to do something. Let's talk about this, bring all these ideas to the table. Let's see what we can filter through. So if anybody else has anything else, I have no problem ending meetings early, but I want to be able to answer everyone's questions and make sure you have a good, clear picture of where this group is going for the next months or or years. This could be a long haul problem.
We
Alan, do you have
do- I'm sorry to interrupt, but we do have another question that just came in from Ed. Have
Alan,
any
my comment.
builders? Oh,
Can
go
I-
ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. Have any builders been asked about tiny or cottage house possibilities, costs, approximate prices, etc.? Can the builders still make their margins and put out a viable product? So we did talk about this with the core housing committee, and there were some concerns that even that may not be entirely affordable. And I don't know if James, if you want to type any answer to that as well, just from your perspective of kind of the cost. I know a lot of it depends on how much the land costs, and then of course the building supplies these days, the cost of those. Hopefully those will continue to come down, but there are a lot of factors that might make it challenging, even if you can get the land for a reasonable price. And I think even the detached might be more expensive. I know James in the Habitat project, okay, he's starting to type with some things, but yeah, they're trying to do more vertical buildings. So they're doing the townhouse construction with shared walls, just because again, that can save on cost. And then they have volunteer labor. So that makes it a lot more viable. It is possible someone might be able to come up with a more affordable tiny or cottage house model, but I don't know that it's going to really fit into that affordable. Maybe it's more in the attainable housing price range.
Go ahead, Alan. Thank you for
Thank
waiting.
you. No problem. I'm not sure if Maggie's the person to ask this question, but when we look at our area, do we have an idea how many people fall into this local worker housing area? I mean, how many people would be classified as a local worker in need of a house? And how much do we have available? I mean, is this going to be the biggest problem we ever thought about? I mean, if we have 50,000 people that fall into this category that don't currently have a house, I mean, is this that big or?
Alan, I can only tell you one thing I know, and Maggie, you go ahead. I have been working with gathering data from all of this, and the reason the local worker issue is coming up is just even stats of investment properties and stats of where we're at with the vacation rentals and things like that. So Maggie, go ahead. I know that it's a loaded question.
Well, it's a great question, right? I mean, that's the whole purpose really for the study, Alan, right?
Okay.
Because we don't really know quantities. We don't know where we are in current demand. We don't know what's available. We don't know what's in the queue. We don't know what our population growth is projected to be. So this is going to provide the blueprint, right, for us to know as a community across these different spectrums of income. What's our shortage now, and where's it going to go based on what we've got in the queue to build, and our growth.
I guess that's where I was going with the question. If we've got, how many people do we have out there that say make combined household income less than $100,000, and how many houses or housing units are available to those people? But I guess that's where we're going with this survey, right?
Yeah, it's certainly part of it. And of course, then looking at the constraints and like the creative solutions that can be considered, right, to try and jump that hurdle of, we know we're short,
Yeah.
but by how many, right?
Right. And it just seems like when I've read all these other articles, the research I've done on other communities that have explored this problem, it's all onesie twosies, even, maybe not onesie twosies, but Sandpoint, I mean, how many units was that? And they jumped through a lot of hoops to get a really small Band-Aid on a really big problem.
Yeah.
So.
And again, we know that there's not an easy answer. It's not going to go away.
Right.
So thanks for bringing that up. And it is trying to get a handle around the local worker issue, because we can say we may have data that says we need to provide, based on the people who are here and what their income level is, this much in these categories. But do we need to provide housing for people who just want to be here in the summer? Do we need to provide housing for people who live or who work in Spokane? And is that still local? These are all questions that are, that's part of what we're hoping to pull together in the next coming year.
Okay, real quickly, two things. We had, let's see, James Casper, he responded. before the recent spike in rental costs, the Alice population was around 40% of the county. And we do have another question from Nash. Would it make sense to do in a semi-rural area that could make USDA loans available for the pocket housing? Just a thought, considering an FHA or conventional need a sizable amount down. So I don't think anywhere in Coeur d'Alene will qualify for USDA. Is there anyone out there that has more information about those types of loans?
Post Falls, are you still eligible? I know Rathdrum is, or I believe Rathdrum. And I'm not sure about Hayden for the USDA.
I believe that we currently are, but will be expiring once the new census data comes out.
And just to clarify, Sean, what you're talking about, so that the advisory group members all know what we are saying, and that is that you, John, as you said, you have to have a certain population to qualify for USDA financing for housing. And so we'll all be out of that population range for that particular financial model. And the other thing is the ALICE population is it's capital ALICE, and it stands for adults living in
Nope. Asset limited,
Asset
income
limited.
constrained, employed.
I was going to say living in camper trailers. Okay.
Oh, there you go. Okay, well, that's a fun one, but hopefully,
Asset limited.
hopefully not.
But explain the ALICE. There's a lot of people who've heard it, but we tend to get into our nomenclature. And would you do that, Hillary? You'd better at it with the ALICE population.
Oh, just to say what it is. So yes, so it is. So it's asset limited, income constrained, employed. So it's, you know, kind of the working poor. So it's a lot of our community members that have 1, 2, 3 jobs and they're having a hard time making ends meet, but they're working hard to pay all their bills. So that is a high percentage, as James Casper gave us. It's around 40% of the entire county. And so they are really feeling the pain. They felt it with the pandemic, with a lot of the businesses closing or having limited hours. And now a lot of the restaurants still with limited hours. And then of course, if they're trying to buy a home, that's a challenge. And then even their rental prices have gone up. So we do have a lot of community members that are being challenged. We just got a link from Mark Tucker with United Way.
Yeah, and if any of you want to, you can go to unitedwayforalice.org/Idaho. Go to United Way and you'll find United Way's website. You'll find the ALICE data and information, what it is and how it's affecting us.
And I would just add, the major wage range for this group is anywhere between $15 to $30 an hour. So that puts it in perspective.
Okay. All right. Okay, so if are there any other questions? We've been wading into
One
this.
more. Do we have time for one more? Or?
Is there a question?
There is. So Jeff had asked, is it possible to incentivize mobile home parks? Big cities have many of them, but haven't seen any new ones here lately. So I guess that's a little, I don't know, Sean, if you want to speak to that or not. I mean, a true mobile home and the manufactured homes and all of that versus if it's an RV park, you know, RV parks are not intended for year-round living. And so that's a challenge in the city that we have restrictions. I think the other cities in the county do as well for kind of conditional use or special use permits to allow the RV parks. And then it's supposed to be seasonal, but that's not the case. A lot of community members live in those year-round. And then we do have existing mobile home parks and some manufactured homes that, you know, that I don't know. We still have the zoning, but it seems to be those are areas where new projects are coming in, more multifamily projects, trying to add more units in those spaces. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that.
Thank you for your description. Over the last few years, I haven't seen much demand or calls come in for that sort of thing. But in the last couple of months, I have asked the building department about that. And I think there are still construction out there that are making those things. But if you notice along I-90 where there used to be single wide, double wide, triple wide manufacturers and sales, that largely those have gone away. And I don't think there's there may be the demand out there, but I don't know where you would purchase them from. It sounds like it's a pretty high hurdle to find one, as well as meet the minimum requirements for the city, like a 40-pound snow load and those sort of things too. So there are hurdles for them.
Great. Okay, well, we're about 5 minutes to wrap up here. And what I do appreciate is that you all we're wading into this huge abyss of local worker housing and defining what all these things mean to us as a region, and continuing to vet out what options are available to us and what data we can support for those options. So if any of you had questions or things that weren't answered, feel free to email me on the CAMPO site. My information's there and I'd be happy to respond to you. Our next working group meeting is in 2 weeks, and we will be putting forth what is actually available currently that we can look at as far as code and or potential minor changes that can help us in local worker housing, and hopefully be able to report back at our August meeting. So with that, if there's no other questions, and I'm going to.
Kiki, there's one other question, sorry.
Okay.
Should be less than 4 minutes to answer it, hopefully. So Ed also asked, what about wages for the workforce workers? The gap is so wide between actual income and qualifying. Isn't it necessary for wage increases? And I would say that's a very loaded question, especially it's a state
That's on
level
everyone's
thing.
mind, Ed, and I think that every employer wants to have employees, and I think that every entity out there has probably spiked up their wages in the last year, and that's not something that I think we're going to, as a group, be able to fix, because there is a big disparity between wages and the price of housing. So we're going to have to talk about it in a lot of different arenas, and being able to solve what employers where need to pay who what isn't probably something we're going to be able to be successful at answering. But thank you for the question. I appreciate it. It frustrates us all, and we're trying to stay at this in finding solutions and trying to put things forward that can be done sooner than later. So is there anything else after that?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, thank you all for your participation. I know it's not a perfect system. We're going to keep at it. We're going to keep working on it. We're going to keep communicating with you and trying to find some solutions. And I hope that you continue to stay engaged. And please share the information with your networks, your organizations, your groups, your boards. It's important that the community knows that we are working hard and that we do get some feedback from them. You know, there's a lot of talented folks in this community, and the more I do this, the more I get a phone call from somebody who says, hey, I did this and da, 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 and I get this wealth of information and resources to share. So thank you again for all being involved, and we will do a mid-month report, and we'll see you at the end of August. Take care all.